All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this Assembly Rules Committee meeting, Committee of the Whole, to order. It is 10:09 a.m. We're noticed today from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. This is a second test of the new hybrid meeting system. A big welcome to the public joining us over the phone, in person, and on the Teams live event. And a huge thank you to the clerk's office and others for helping make this happen. I think we should have a smoother meeting today. We did a sound check and we were able to hear everyone, and hopefully everyone's able to hear us clearly. All right, let's go ahead and start with the roll call, please.
Felix Rivera,
Present.
Christopher Constant,
Here.
Crystal Kennedy,
Here.
Cameron Perez Verdia, Austin Quinn Davidson, Meg Zelatel,
Here.
Pete Peterson,
Present.
John Weddleton,
Here.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Here.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that Jennifer was really very low, was very hard to hear. So
Okay,
might be a
that's
volume issue.
actually
Thanks.
Thanks. It's actually Mandy, honest. But we'll go ahead and make sure folks in the room that we are speaking very closely to the mic and that we are speaking loudly and clearly and projecting so folks can hear. So we're going to go ahead and move on to new business. So first we'll start with a report from the Assembly Chair and the Municipal Clerk. I believe, so Barbara is out of town, so I believe that Desiree will be giving the report today from the Municipal Clerk. So a few things from me. First is the I Can't Breathe resolution. So at this point, we are waiting on the Chief Equity Officer to come on board to make additional progress on some of the commitments in the resolution, which for those who don't remember, this is a resolution that we passed and approved in June of last year. From what I understand after talking with the administration, the hiring process for the Chief Equity Officer is currently stuck in HR, and the administration is working on getting it quote unquote unstuck with the hope of opening the application period ASAP. We have our third session on anti-racist and equity training next week. To reiterate what has been stated in the training/dialogues, this is a journey that won't be ending this month. I look forward to continuing that journey with the Assembly throughout 2021. Last, members should have received a calendar invite and email explanation from me about the first of a series of community dialogues being organized in 2021 by the Alaska Black Caucus. I hope members are able to attend this Sunday evening and into the future. Next, on the Assembly office remodel, a contractor was selected by a representative of the owner of City Hall. As a reminder, we are all tenants in City Hall. The work should begin in earnest with a new tentative schedule to be completed in March, I believe. I understand that the clerk's office and others continue to work with the Chugach Eagle River members to see what we can do to get offices in their district. Redo of Assembly website. The Assembly will have an appropriation before it at our next regular Assembly meeting on Tuesday to allocate dollars into the fund for the project. The project team has been reorganized to assist in moving this project forward. Homelessness Communications, Northwest Strategies, the contractor for this project, has been fulfilling many of their contractual commitments. Members have maybe seen some of the work being done on social media and other avenues. So they're going to continue doing that work for the next few weeks, possibly longer. Anything else members would like me to report on, or any questions?
Chair, this is Mrs. Allard. I don't know if I was on record of being here with Mandy.
Yes, we did hear you, Jamie. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
We've had some comments on how many people to allow into the chambers at our meetings.
Sure.
I wonder if you could address where we are on that.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to address that. So, as folks are aware, current Emergency Order 17 sets a upper capacity limit for political expression and for religious worship of 50% capacity. After having a discussion with Assembly leadership in the clerk's office, we are looking at making an adjustment to where we are currently. Currently, we are at 25% capacity, which allows for roughly 40 to 45 members of the public to attend in the Assembly chambers and have all the proper social distancing and all the other requirements. And then when the chambers get full, then we open up the Wilda Marson to allow an additional 40 to 45 individuals. So we are looking at the possibility of upping that. We don't have a firm number just yet. I'm hoping by Tuesday, we should have a firm number of what we will be increasing that current 40 to 45 limit threshold to.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or discussion before we move on to the municipal clerk's report? All right, we're going to go ahead and move on then to the municipal clerk's report. Desiree, go ahead.
So I'm just gonna give you a tiny little update. I'm gonna touch on the remodel just a bit. So I know that you guys, that Felix just mentioned it, but I wanted to mention that we are at the very start of the process for the offices in Chugach-Eagle River. It's gonna be hopefully a smaller undertaking than City Hall, and that should get done hopefully pretty soon. But we plan on having contractors out next week to check out the space and come up with estimates and a possible layout. The Assembly website, I think Felix also mentioned, Jennifer's put in a request to OIT for an Anita vendor. We are waiting to hear back from OIT, but on Tuesday, you will see AR 2021-23 that appropriates funds to this project. The testimony form, the online testimony form is up and running and it's working well. You'll see your first AIM on the upcoming addendum that includes written testimony received from members of the public using this form. Staff will continue to monitor both the testimony systems until February 15th, and then the testimony at anchorageak.gov email address will be discontinued. And then election season starting. Our election team is super duper busy and they are doing their best to prepare for April, including receiving mayoral and other candidate filings. So that's our little update.
Great, thanks so much, Desiree. Are there any questions or comments for Desiree? All right, great, thanks so much. Appreciate all of the hard work of the clerk's office. Okay, next we're gonna go ahead and move on to Assembly priorities. I don't really have much to discuss on this topic this month. As members know, we got the first quarterly newsletter out, and then obviously we're hoping to reproduce that and get a new one out every quarter. Next month, I'm hoping to start discussing some of the specific priority areas again, and I'll be in touch with specific committee chairs about this so that we can prepare in advance of the February Rules Committee and have a good discussion on one or possibly two of the priority areas, perhaps some of the areas where we haven't made as much progress on some of the goals as we had hoped to achieve. Any other thoughts or discussion on that before we move on? Okay. Then next we'll move on to Assembly member discussion on pending business and update from committee's upcoming business. So as a reminder for this agenda topic, we're going to go ahead and go round table. I will just go off of the participants and I'll just go in order there, which I believe is an alpha order. And then if members have either any individual Assembly member pending business or any update from committees upcoming business they'd like to discuss, now would be the time. So let me go ahead and pull up the member list. We'll go ahead and start with Jamie. Jamie, would you like to add anything to this discussion? You're on mute if you're trying to speak right now.
I don't have anything at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we'll go to Chris.
Not at this time. Thank you.
I too don't have any items currently. Just finished up with the Native Village of Eklutna project and working on that. I do want to bring up that the Port of Alaska, we may find ourselves asking the question, do we want a consultant on that project again? As we move towards a mayoral transition, it might benefit us to think about how we have our leadership in that process, but that's for another day. Nothing. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And yeah, thanks, Chris. Just as a reminder to the members, when you are speaking, it's helpful to make sure your camera is turned on, so that way folks on the live events can see you. All right, next we'll go to Crystal.
Good morning. The only thing that I can, well, there's a couple things I guess I want to mention. One of them is that I'm working on, I had mentioned something when we were dealing with the Title 28 revisions that I was working on kind of an approach to maybe do a deeper dive from the public's perspective on the election code. So I am working on that. There's nothing really to present at this point. There's just some ideas that I'm throwing around with Dean and Barbara. So, you know, I guess we'll wait and see what comes of that. But the other thing I kind of wanted to, well, let me see, what order do I want to do this? I guess I'll mention, which John probably would mention anyway, that we're still working on the code revisions on the marijuana licensing and on special land use permitting. Those are just kind of coming along. We may have a document pretty soon to be able to turn over to the rest of the assembly for the bigger conversation, because we're making quite a bit of progress on that. And John will probably want to add more to that anyway. And in terms of the Public Safety Committee, we don't have any real projects on there other than we'll be getting some updated data from the police department pretty soon here for the 2020 information that tends to come to us quarterly. So we'll probably be getting that at our next meeting, but we don't really have an agenda lined up yet. And I think we want to just really, after the conversation we had at the last Public Safety Committee meeting in regard to the project for the for identifying and helping solve some of the cases for the missing and murdered Indigenous people, I think there's a couple of different things that we kind of might want to keep more of a finger on the pulse of. So maybe we'll see more in regards to that. I know there's quite a bit of excitement about the idea of just doing some more collaboration and getting more information out. So maybe the education piece on that would be something that the Assembly could get more involved in. So anyway, my big question though, and I'll just kind of throw this out there. I don't know that we would have a big discussion on it, but for people to think about, and that is how we deal with amendments. And I've gotten quite a bit of feedback lately about the frustration from the public in terms of just kind of getting blindsided a lot of times by the amendments that come forward and not understanding them, and then not having an opportunity to really weigh in on any of them. And, you know, and it's funny because obviously that's something that I know Mr. Haberman has brought up, you know, several times, that there's just not a good opportunity once we start deliberating and throwing out amendments for the public to actually participate. So I'm hoping that we can maybe talk a little bit more about how we stretch that process out a little bit. The other thing that's kind of problematic with amendments is it seems like we do work sessions on Friday. We start mulling things over the weekend and coming up with ideas, and then we pretty much slam Dean with everything on Monday morning. So it gets very difficult for him to be able to respond to all of the requests and the requests for amendments that the Assembly may be throwing at him. So anyway, if we could kind of talk about if there's a better way to handle that, both from the public's perspective, both from a work perspective, and just keep all of us more in tune with where things are heading. So that's, I guess, my thought on that. And I don't think I have anything else. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Crystal. I've added amendments under other items. So, Dean, I see that you're in the queue to speak on that. I'll go ahead and wait for you to speak on that until we get to that under other items. Okay, so next we'll move on to Pete.
Thanks, Felix. The legislature has gavelled in and the session has started. And we do get weekly updates once things are up and moving forward down there from AML. And so that it's I believe it's every Friday afternoon. Niels Andreasen, the executive director of AML, sends us out weekly updates. And so we can sort of keep track of what's going on down there and see if any legislation or see what effects the legislation they've introduced might have on the municipality of Anchorage. And just putting together an agenda for the Ethics and Election Committee. Just got back in town, and so we'll hopefully be sending that out later today or first of next week. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much. I guess on that point, Pete, I think it would be great if we can make sure that those updates that AML sends out, if we could make sure that at least the legislative committee gets forwarded any of those updates on business in Juneau, I think that would be really helpful. And I know I have to talk to you offline about seeing if we can get a meeting of the legislative committee up to so that we can talk both about things going on in Juneau as well as the lobbyists and how we can maybe utilize them more on the assembly end. So looking forward to having that discussion with you, Pete.
Okay, sounds great.
Next is Meg.
Did we not skip Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm going to do people in person last.
Okay, great. So the main project, as you all have probably seen through the agenda that I'm working on, is the EOS to AOS project with John and Suzanne. Just to, as you dig into those, and I know we have a work session, I believe on the 5th, those are meant to pretty much take the emergency orders as they exist now as a snapshot in time and put them into ordinances using our typical legislative process. And they are all termed in a way to be responsive to COVID-19. It's really to work through that conversation we had around normalizing or trying to operationalize some of the things that have resulted as a from the emergency declaration, but that would maybe no longer need to be contingent on having an emergency declaration in order to continue with. I will, on a different topic, I will continue to be working with the clerk staff and the aides we have around communications. They're continuing to work on videos, really great videos on two coming up about how to read an ordinance, and then excuse me, and then the community councils. So continue to work with them, really doing fantastic work there. And I will just put in a plug that if you're at community council, if you can help highlight both that work of those videos and the new contact buttons on the assembly page. There's a big blue button around, you know, emailing all of us like we were used to prior to receiving electronic testimony, and then two green buttons that start to work through how to submit either to testify telephonically or provide written testimony, and really just working to educate the public about the difference between the two, that testimony is something that goes into our record, even if it's written, versus emailing all of us. And then really whatever your practice might be is do you respond to the testimony emails, or do you just take that in like you would take in verbal testimony, and that if folks are looking more for a response, that they should email that all assembly member email address. And remember, there's that auto reply on that email address that then provides district level information about how to contact your particular member or how to find your district if you're uncertain. And then after that, the other thing I also want to make you all aware of that's a little bit different that you may not know about is that I'm on the advisory board for the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. And we are really I'm on the data committee. We are really digging in to the fidelity of the data that is collected in the homeless response system, how to ensure it's really good, that we can rely on it, that it can be used at a policy-making level and for operations. The reason I raise that here is I think it's important that we recognize the municipal role as the municipality contracts with providers to provide sheltering services, or as we look at rapid rehousing programs or other programs, that we have this data, and the better the data, the better for us, that we can rely on as we look at making decisions. And so if anyone wants to come deep dive with me into data, or learn more about what's available, I am happy to do that with you. And then I will work to bring some of that information into the Committee on Housing and Homelessness, but that could take a whole meeting just to even get into a little bit of the data. So I'm extending that opportunity or that invitation if you want to dive into data around issues of homelessness. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Meg. Yeah, go ahead. John has a question for you.
So Meg, thanks. You know, on the data there, you know, I did a tour of one of the shelters, and they said that the current data gathering, I think it's HMIS or something, is cumbersome for them to use, so they won't use it. And are you looking at ways to make that easier to use, or some way to help people use it better?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a great observation. We were discussing with ICA, which is our HMIS contractor. You know, they get their scores for each project that agencies or HMIS users have, and we're finding emergency shelters to not have great scores for data entry for a lot of the reasons you just stated. So ICA is particularly looking about how they could support the emergency shelters, and then we need to figure out how we can ensure that data is entered in a timely manner. But as we heard from someone, you know, in pre-COVID times at Brother Francis, 240 individuals might be walking into the building. There's not time to do data entry. So we're talking about things like scan cards. Some of the data is static, like once we get name, birthday, partial social security, but there's data that's day to day. So like, where did you stay the previous night, and some other things like that. So we're trying to balance the two. So it's really up for conversation. And I'm reviewing the data quality plan, and excuse me, I can report out more on that as we, as the coalition looks to adopt the data quality plan. They are the ones who are kind of the owners with the state on the HMIS contract. But if you have ideas, please bring them forward, because we are all ears and really trying to crack that, because data at the emergency shelter level is some of the best information we could be getting to drive policy decisions and really understand how people ended up there and where they're going, and if there's a break in sheltering, where they may have gone. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Meg. Thanks, John. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. I think that completes our folks who are on the Teams live event. We'll move to in-person. I'll go ahead and start with John.
All right, thanks. So Community Economic Development Committee, we're continuing to work on licensing for shelters, and that is very complicated. Meg's done a huge amount of work on it, thank you. There's some urgency to it because the land use part of it has worked its way through the Planning and Zoning Commission fairly quickly, and we'll probably need to get this licensing done in the next month or so. So look forward to something hitting us in February or so. We're also, as Crystal said, we're working on the marijuana rules, and that's moving along fairly quickly. We're also looked at, we had one meeting on how the city handles kind of neglected rights-of-way and easements and how we can reassert those. And I think we know that was the catalyst for that was the issues at Campbell Lake, but those issues are across the city. So we broadened it just kind of look at, how do we handle this in general? And then when various issues regarding Campbell Lake are resolved, maybe we'll have some, standard system for kind of asserting those rights of ways that work for the public in general, but also in some of these cases, it has a big impact on the homeowners nearby, and we want to have something that's sensitive to that. We're working on EOs to AOs that Meg covered, and we're getting feedback on that. And it's, I think we've got a number of emails, and they're somewhat generally opposed to it, but I think that's kind of shows that what we're doing has some benefit. When a mandate, a law comes out as an emergency order, there is no feedback loop on it from the public, and we can say moving it to AOs, it's a normal process, and people can comment on it, and we're getting those responses. So whether or not those actually end up passing, the process is clearly working. At AMATS, for the public, that's the system that we use for allocating federal road funds. We will see the long-range transportation plan fairly soon. I think that'll take us a bit of time to get through. Generally, it goes side by side with the MTP, Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the latest version, but we approved that last year to get it done in time for FHWA, and we will take that as a starting point for our city long-range transportation plan. The new Metropolitan Transportation Plan 2050 is in process, and that'll be a several-year process. We're also making substantial headway on a new scoring system, and that's to get new transportation projects, and that's roads, trails, pedestrian facilities, and so on, into into the hopper for being looked at. And the new scoring system is more objective. The past one was very, very subjective. And it also links things much more closely to our adopted plans. So do transportation projects kind of help us move forward in all the variety of goals that we have in our plans. So I'm really happy with that. And we have a joint meeting on that, I think coming up later this month or in February with AMAT's Policy Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee. We also, working with Megan, Chris, and I had a resolution that we just presented to the Policy Committee and to the Technical Advisory Committee for AMATS regarding the Glen Highway to Seward Highway connection through Fairview. We've got a big plan for kind of the area around 36th Avenue, but the real damage right now is the kind of limbo that properties are in that section in Fairview. Without knowing what's going to happen to that road, people aren't investing in those properties. They're not buying and selling them because of the uncertainty. So we want to put a higher priority on that. And we've worked through that with a number of issues with pretty smart people who know how road building goes. And I think we'll have something that hopefully would speed up the process for that. We also, another project that's languished for quite a while, and Mandy's here, will probably roll her eyes, is new rules for quasi-judicial issues, which are various licenses, liquor license, marijuana licenses, and even rezones and so on. And the process we use for those is not followed crisply what one would expect for that kind of action. And we're very, very close to that, getting that ready. And we have been for about a year, and COVID kind of sidelined things. But it's not forgotten, though it's neglected for sure. And one last thing is, we've had a number of resolutions regarding the Alaska Railroad's claim of exclusive use for 200 feet or 100 feet of either side of their tracks. And that means it's theirs and they get to do what they want, and they can charge you for use and so on. And that's been challenged, and I think for good reason. And we've challenged it through a couple of resolutions. Most of the actual work to fix that would be done at the state level. But the railroad did sue the Flying Crown Homeowners Association, which are the homes near the airstrip in Ocean View, and because that their railroad goes, they share land there, and the city has similar issues because the railroad goes through our parks, including one at Ocean View, but many parks as it works its way through the city. So I understand that the city has decided to attach itself through, some way to that case and share its interests. Flying Crown obviously was sued by it, but NSTAR, Trigatch Electric, and now the city will be attached to it, and I expect others will as well. I don't know how long it'll take to resolve that, but it is moving forward. So those are the highlights. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, John. All right, next we have Suzanne.
Thanks, Felix. As Meg and John mentioned, I'm involved with them with the EOs to AOs project, and I appreciate the work both of them have done on it. And John's note that we're getting a lot of feedback, and also John has also made the point too that this is the first pandemic we've been through, and we are working through processes and trying to figure out the best way to proceed. So I think the feedback is very helpful as we move through it, and I believe we have a work session scheduled for next Friday. Is it, Felix? Or do you know offhand? I don't know. Okay. I think I saw one come up. The other thing I'll mention is that as part of that project, we're exploring having a sunset clause for face coverings and tying it to metrics. And we will be addressing and discussing this in the next health policy committee meeting in February. And Meg and I are working on putting together the agenda. We're looking at extending the meeting to 1.5 hours. It's normally scheduled for 1 hour, and lining up different speakers. So that's it for now, Felix. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much. And just for the record, that work session is on February 5th at 11 a.m. Okay, so I'll go ahead and go next. So one item that I forgot to mention during my chair report. So earlier this week, I got some good feedback from the sponsors of the ordinance that was passed to create formal government-to-government relations with the native village of Eklutna. Next week, likely, the clerk's office will be reaching out to the native village of Eklutna to look at scheduling either one or both of the mandatory meetings that we have as was outlined in that ordinance for 2021. So perhaps in the next few weeks, you will see calendar invites for both of those meetings. And then on individual priorities for me, really nothing new to add from me other than the items that have been previously mentioned in previous months' Rules Committee meetings. I will add one thing, that on February 9th, the Assembly should be seeing a resolution from the Public Transit Advisory Board supporting the concept of fare free transit. And so I think that will be a good way to kickstart that conversation and see how we can move forward with that concept. That is something that both Meg and I think are particularly interested in shepherding and moving forward. Okay, I believe Chris wants to add a few items. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. So last night at Community Council, 2 items were raised of interest that I thought I should probably bring up here just to preview. One is, as we have done every year since I've been on the body, I will be drafting and bringing forward a resolution to support the state's efforts to create for fire and police an access to a defined benefit program through the PERS and TERS system. That's going to be something that I'll be bringing up here pretty soon because the legislative session has kicked off. And secondly, there's some conversation about the state engaging in bond, what's called a general obligation bond. And so what was asked for the community council I attended last night was to submit to the legislature a list of their own capital improvement projects that they have. And this sparked for me an idea that I'm going to be exploring, in which, separate from our own CIP and CIB and all of the processes that we go through, soliciting through the Federation all community councils in the next month to submit lists of projects that would be incorporated into a document that I would like us to consider by resolution and AIM, submitting to the legislature on behalf of the community councils, again, separate from our own CIP and CIB lists. So just note that I'll be looking at that process, and it might be coming forward. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So that completes that item on the agenda. We're going to go ahead and move on to other items. So first is, so I have 3 items here. First is COVID-19. Second is amendments. Thanks, Crystal, for introducing that topic. And then third is a topic I wanted to add, which is regarding topics of interest for the Rules Committee meeting for 2021. So let's start with the first one, COVID-19. So just like we have done in recent months, I wanted to create space to have an open discussion about any issues which have come up regarding COVID-19 that folks want the Assembly to engage in, either through committee process, work sessions, or other forums. I don't have an item to kick off the discussion this month, so I'll just open the floor and see if anyone has something to add. Go ahead, John.
We desperately need to see a clear presentation, nothing fancy, but each category of allocation, how much was spent, even if we don't know exactly who the check was written to even. I'd like to get that at some point, but how much was spent, what was it spent on, and really even just that, and as soon as possible. And the problem is that people don't have that information. They should have that information. We should have that information. Without it, then it leaves a huge vacuum for confusion. I mean, when we are told very clearly that $4.5 million was spent on a $250,000 trail, it's hard to rebut that when we don't have the information, even that fundamental. And the public deserves it. We need it too. So, we talked about that at the Budget Committee yesterday, but we need as much clarity as we can. And then I got some information from Ira a few days ago I haven't looked at yet, and I'm trying to just go through all our various allocations and form that kind of sheet, but I'm not thinking I'm the best person to do that. So anyway, that for those on the administration listening, help.
Thanks, John. And I think just to recap a little bit of the discussion that happened at the Budget and Finance Committee, I believe both Chris, Constant, and then members of the administration are working on fulfilling your request. Meg, you wanted to speak to that?
Actually, another COVID-related topic, so I can wait.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. So as we work through the EOs to AOs project, I'd like to make a request or start to get a sense from members, what pieces are we missing or have not yet addressed that would need to be continued via emergency declaration. There are 2 right now that I'm aware of, but I'm not sure that I feel comfortable enough with the full scope of the emergency declaration in terms of what operations it may be altering at the municipal level. Like a chart would be really great. The 2 I know that we aren't specifically addressing at this moment in time are appropriations and capacity limitations, but there are probably more. And then similar, if ordinances are passed, I think we should also keep those in a chart and make sure that we're keeping that up to date and at the front of mind as we move, throughout the remainder of COVID. So I want to make sure that if we do take a new tack and we're aware of what is behind the emergency declaration, that we just keep all those pieces kind of organized and together so that everyone's on the same page. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other discussion on this topic before we move on?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Constant here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just would add that I don't want to get towards debate on these items, but I think there's a very high bar on this whole project. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Seeing no further discussion, we'll go ahead and move on to amendments. So Crystal laid out her discussion point of view regarding amendments and some of the frustration of both the public and I will admit members of the assembly that I have seen regarding amendments, particularly getting complicated ones on the floor. Dean, I'll go ahead and start with you. I know you wanted to speak to the topic and then we'll open it up to others.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, sorry, I've multitasking to meet the deadline by noon, so I didn't catch the recent immediate conversation, but I asked to speak while Mrs. Kennedy was talking about the amendment process. And the public, I guess what she described as the public's frustration that the assembly makes amendments, at the meeting, and the public didn't have a chance to weigh in on them. And I just wanted to state the state of the law on this subject. So you, of course, have your legislative process concerns with the public's involvement. And I'm just going to state what the law says about this. And in case law and in state statute for municipalities, state statute does not prohibit the home rules from doing something different. But this is what the state statute says. And I'm not reading this out. I'm really stating this from memory. That following the public hearing on an ordinance that a assembly may pass. Following the public hearing, the assembly may pass an ordinance with or without amendment. So after the public hearing closes, the law allows the assembly to make amendments, after the public hearing is done, and they can pass this with amendments, whatever they are. So this allows an assembly, a municipal assembly, to do that without having the public weigh in on the amendments. Or maybe the amendments were available for the public to read beforehand, maybe not, but it allows that process by law. And I would also state there's case law, and for home rule municipalities, we have a similar rule somewhere that says you can pass with or without amendment after the public hearing closes. And now we have some case law that puts little restriction on that amendment process. And the case law says something like, if the amendments substantially alter the ordinance so as to change its basic character, then we're required to have another public hearing on that ordinance. So if the amendments are so substantial that the legislation's characters changed substantially, you shouldn't go ahead and approve the amendments. You should postpone and open another public hearing because of the nature, basic character of that legislation has changed so much. So that's the legal requirements. So while the public maybe want to see every single amendment and weigh in on it before they're deliberated and passed, the law does not necessarily require that.
Thanks, Dean. All right, I'll go ahead and go in the queue. I'll start with Chris.
Thank you. For my part, I am going to resist any intention to restrict the member's ability to make amendments. I know it's complex and I know it's challenging. I would be supportive of a conversation, say in the Rules Committee, about setting customs, setting practices that we agree to, and if we're honorable, then we won't transgress. But there may come times when we have work to do that needs to be done, and by general agreement, we do that work. And so the rules are established to allow a member to make a motion to amend, and this has long been held in parliamentary procedure. So for my part, while I'm more than happy to have this conversation, I will pretty heartily be on the opposite side of the conversation if it comes to restricting a member's ability to make a motion to amend.
Thanks, Chris. John?
Well, thanks. Having spent many years on the other side of the dais, I know it's always frustrating to be sitting there and then these amendments come up and you have no clue what's being talked about. And so I understand that frustration. I think we've gone a long ways towards helping when we post the amendment on the screen. But even then, it's clear people want to comment on those as well. But the thing with amendments is typically the amendments are in response to what the public has said. So we're listening to the public, through emails and phone calls and the testimony at the meetings, and creating these amendments to say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's make this change. So, we're responding to the public with the amendments, and then if you put them back to the public, do we get into this endless loop of every time we make a change due to the public, we send it back to the public and make another change due to the public, and at some point you just need to do it. And Dean had pointed out, if it's a substantial change, then maybe you should put the whole thing back to public comment. And we do that. I mean, that's what the S versions typically are. I mean, one of the reasons with S versions is you get a whole stack of amendments and we say, this is so much, let's make an S version. And generally, the practice has been to allow another public hearing and people can speak a second time if we have an S version. So we may want to fine tune when we draw the line and something becomes an S version, but we do generally follow that process. So, I don't know that our amendment process is fundamentally flawed. I would like to see them posted and available for people as soon as we prepare them, and often they're ready the Friday before, or even if they're Monday or Tuesday morning, just so people can look at them. And if they're done prior to the public hearing, then they can comment on them at that time too. So anyway, that's amendments are good. That's how we typically respond to the public. Thanks.
Thanks. Pete?
Thanks, Felix. I was just going to mention the S version as well, but I think it's the amendments to the amendments on the fly that are probably the most, or some of the most difficult for the public to follow, and sometimes they can be difficult for the members to follow as well, especially if you're calling in. So I think we have to attempt to make the amendments to the amendments more understandable for the public. Maybe make sure we print those up on the screen so that they can see what the amendment to the proposed amendment is. And I think that would not only help the public, but help the members as well. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Crystal?
Thanks, Felix. I think there's a little bit of confusion about what I'm actually asking for or suggesting, but, I certainly don't want to do anything that restricts the ability to make an amendment, particularly the way we have to do it on the fly sometimes. I mean, I think that's reasonable. There are just times when you have to do that. And of course, as Dean pointed out, we, by law, have that ability to do so. I think what I'm really getting at is when we have these bigger, broader conversations that we know are going to be leading to amendments or leading to S versions, that the public wants to be kind of aware of those conversations and what could be coming. And probably at that point, we're talking about really moving dates up so that there's more time, again, between that period, like when we have a work session on Friday, and then we have we try to get the amendments in as soon after that as possible to get worked up, and then we might see them on Monday. We might not see them till literally in the middle of the meeting. So I'm trying to kind of push back the timing a little bit. It's not so much the function and process itself as it is the timing. And one thing that I haven't actually mentioned is what was suggested to me was that we use our off Tuesday nights to have work sessions rather than Friday mornings or afternoons, and then basically give ourselves really an entire week at that point. And we don't use the time period in the middle of the day when so many people are working, including some of the assembly members themselves, But anyway, so it was also a thought about trying to work out the timing of all this so that there is more transparency. There is the ability for the public to really look at what we're doing, listen to what we're doing, and then it gives them the time to respond as well. And that doesn't mean you would have to have an amendment a week in advance, but it would be enough where you could say, hey, I'm going to have to work up an amendment to that because I don't like this part, or I would like this part to say something else. And people get then the impression and the understanding of kind of where thoughts are going, and it does give them the opportunity to weigh in. So I want everybody to look at this in the bigger picture. This isn't about restricting, it's really about broadening. So again, probably would take a little bit more conversation than today, but the intent of this is not to restrict making amendments. It's actually to give us more time to make better ones. Thanks.
Thanks, Crystal. Next, I am in the queue. So yeah, I agree. I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion to this topic today, but I think this is possibly a topic of interest that we can include for future rules committee meetings. I think adding my own thoughts on this, I think the problem here comes to when we as assembly members prep our amendments. And I think each assembly member does it differently. And I think most assembly members are probably in one of two categories. One is we prep our amendments or start thinking about our amendments after the item gets introduced. And then second is another group of assembly members likely starts thinking and prepping their amendments after the work session on the item. And, I think there are positives and negatives to both of those. And I think both of those directly impact Dean's workload. So I think it's an interesting discussion and happy to continue having it in future meetings to see if there are maybe some tweaks that we need to make in that process of when we prep amendments and how that is all done, and see if there's some collective thoughts and unison on how we move forward with that. Next, I have Meg.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking about John's comment about this kind of endless loop, and it reminds me a little bit, if you're unfamiliar, but the AMATS process, a lot of things and a lot of changes that seem somewhat minor sometimes are considered large enough to have to go back out for public comment. I have found in my short time on the body that one, it sometimes causes you to pause about whether or not you're going to propose the change because it does open back up a public comment period. And two, that even when we do have a public process, that if we want to then incorporate those public comments, it can catch you in that endless loop. So just from that experience, I think we should just keep that in mind, that there's got to be that right balance. And I do get Crystal's intent, but I just wanted to share that experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. Next, we have Jamie. Jamie, you're on mute if you're trying to speak. Okay, we'll come back to you, Jamie. So, want to note for the record, we've been joined by Forrest Dunbar. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, in response to what Ms. Kennedy suggested about, timing and other procedures to make the process better, I think that is a great area for conversation. And it is definitely something we could improve upon. So there's nothing to resist there, especially in the context of us making a decision about what night or how much time we spend on questions of amendments before meetings, as long as we just don't step on the rights of the members at the meetings. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. All right, I'll go ahead and go back to Jamie, see if we can get you on. Jamie, go ahead. So Jamie, I'm being told that your cell phone is muted right now. So if you could try unmuting, then hopefully we can hear you. Yeah, star 6. All right. I guess in lieu of being unable to hear you, and staff is trying to see what else they can do, if you could put your comment in the chat, and then I'll go ahead and read that into the record. And then hopefully we'll be able to hear you soon. We were able to hear you earlier, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Thanks so much, Crystal, for opening that topic of discussion. That's actually a good segue to this next item that I wanted to talk about, which is topics of interest for the Rules Committee to discuss. Wanted to create space today for members to bring up items that they'd like this committee to investigate or explore in 2021. Those could be items that we started discussing in 2020, or it could be new topics which members would like this committee to discuss, like amendments. To be clear, one, this shouldn't necessarily be a debate on the topic. I want members to feel comfortable bringing up any topics they'd like us to discuss, and we can have debate or discussion in future meetings. Obviously, some of the items that we bring up today in this committee will have a robust public discussion as well. I think this committee is a unique place for us to have an open, frank, and honest discussion before we bring items to the broader public for input. It is why this committee was created in the first place many, many years ago. I have one item to kick this off for something that I think this committee should discuss in 2021, and then we can see if other items, if other members have items. So first is a charter commission. So as I've stated at a regular assembly meeting last year when we indefinitely postponed a proposed charter change, there are a variety of vagaries and other technical changes to our charter, which we saw in 2020, which I think should be discussed in a very public and robust way rather than taking a piecemeal approach to them. So after talking with Assembly Council, I think this is something that would technically and typically be done through the creation of a charter commission. So I'd like to begin the more of the philosophical organizational discussion of creating such a commission with this committee in future months. And just to reiterate and repeat what I stated before, this is obviously something that will have very robust public discussion before something like this even gets done. But again, this committee is, I think, a unique place to have these types of discussions before we bring it to the broader public for input. So that's the one thing that I wanted to add to potentially something you'll see on agendas for future Rules Committee meetings. Obviously, Crystal has brought up the idea of amendments, so that's something you'll probably see in future Rules Committee meetings. I'm going to go ahead and go through on see if other members have topics that they would like this committee to address. So I'll start with Meg.
Thanks, Felix. Mine is one around Assembly Council's time and capacity. I feel like we are taking on some rather large code changes, and I don't think they're going to end anytime soon. So I just want to ensure that we are mindful of the workflow and so that everyone's managing to get their work through. And I think that somewhat ties into the amendment conversation. Sometimes it's just a matter of when it can get drafted, but definitely would like to have that conversation. Thanks.
Great, thanks. That'll be a good one. Chris?
Thank you. As I discussed, I think last week with a couple of folks at one of our public meetings, like we did with the budget process, where in May/June, latest July, we are having some pretty intensive work sessions on the budget. I would like us to establish a process where we, working with, on the lead of the legislative committee, do a broad and deep series of meetings or long meeting in which we take our annual legislative program and we review it just as the session is about to start, and we kind of prioritize it, and then we set up a work plan for how we collectively are going to address the items within it so that we can be more effective at our work with the legislature. So I'm hoping we can create a parallel process through this committee for reviewing our legislative program in the same way that we do our budget process in the summer.
Great, thanks. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read a comment from Jamie Allard on the previous discussion around amendments. So I'm just going to read this verbatim quote. Placing amendments on screen is important, but amendments do happen once we see what others are presenting. This is the legislative process. Although it may be difficult for the public to follow, it's vital we as members, we can adjust as we get closer to the assembly meetings as things are constantly changing. Thanks, Jamie, for that input. All right, any other topics of interest for the Rules Committee that you would like this committee to discuss in 2021? I'll probably add this as a discussion topic in February as well, just in case folks want some time to think and mull this over. Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
Thanks, Felix. I would also like us to address the issue of resources, and not just for staffing in the clerk's department, although that's definitely a part of it, and I appreciate how we have expanded those resources, because I think it's helpful not just to us but to the public. But a lot of times when there's information that we want from the administration, they have a staffing constraint as well. And some of it, I think, like when it comes to introducing legislation, when we have a very thorough AM, when we have supplemental information on the front end, it's very helpful to the public. And I know we also have a process, a template for when we introduce an AO to, include different stakeholders. But even, more resources for the public along the lines of a dedicated constituent navigator or legislative liaison. I know that when we had discussions concerning the charter, there were a lot of requests from the public for analysis, legal analysis, beyond the capability, well, I'm not an attorney, can provide, and even, I think, beyond the capacity that many of the attorneys working for the muni, simply have time for, too. So I would like us to talk about maybe ways in which we can provide some additional resources to the public. We've received the feedback regarding how difficult it is to read through some of those documents, which I can completely appreciate being a layperson, and how much we rely upon the AM. So yeah, I just would put that out there for more conversation about resources for us, the public, the administration, so we can, provide more information. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. Any other topics on this or discussion on this topic? And like I said, I'll probably add this again for February, just in case other folks might be mulling over some additional topics.
Felix, if I,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
how was the charter commission formed? I mean, is that like an official thing?
Yeah, I would ask Dean to speak to that. But yes, I think it is an official thing, much like you would create other types of commissions through a resolution. I think it would be very similar. You would create something like that through a resolution. But Dean, do you have a more specific answer or a different answer to that? Dean is
Hello.
oh,
If I understood the question, to make a charter commission process more official,
yes, that was the question.
and what that process is. Well, my apologies, I don't have an answer right at this moment, but I see we have some time left in the meeting. I could look and get back to you maybe before you adjourn or after this meeting.
Thanks, Dean. I don't think there's a rush on that. Just likely the topic of a charter commission is going to be something that's on a future rules committee meeting. So let's just make, if you could do the research, that'd be great. But I think let's make sure we have that ready for a future meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. So not seeing any other comments. Like I said, I'll add that to the February, and then we can see if there's anything else that we want to add on to the plate of the Rules Committee meeting for 2021. So let's go ahead and move on to unfinished business. There is nothing under unfinished business. So let's go ahead and move on to audience participation. We'll start with folks in person, then I'll ask Desiree and staff to see if we have anyone on the phone to speak, and then we'll do Q&A. So let's go ahead and start with in person. Welcome. Yeah, I will go ahead and use my timer. Thanks.
On? Okay, now it's on. Okay. My name is Eugene Carl Heyman. I live in the Matthew Valley. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more likely in the public interest. What I'd like to talk to you today in this brief time is the consent agenda and what I witnessed over the years of how you're handling the consent agenda. It's an overloaded circuit that you're creating where it may be many hours later after you deal with a consent agenda that you open up for public hearings. And I've witnessed meetings where some striking important issues like dealing with the taxi cab industry, you don't start their public hearing until 11 o'clock at night. So it's been a significant hardship for the public to engage with you on public hearings. And that consent agenda should come after public hearings. But then your consent agenda is overloaded with many items, these particularly legislation and resolutions and stuff, particularly what happened last meeting in reference to the horrible situation that happened to our nation's capital. And where was the engagement for the public on that issue? You wrote a statement where the public was not engaged and didn't have a chance to engage. And by the way, initial audience participation was plugged in the past year or so because of the difficulties I've witnessed over the meetings where you have audience participation in the end, and many a time you don't get to it. So my thought too is that if there ever is a time when you can't get to audience participation in the end, you got to rethink that and that long list that's created that situation. Okay, but again, you can't be having these kind of, and also you've changed the situation where, when I say you respectfully, the amount of an item. So many items now are on the consent agenda because you raised the bar so they don't fall into public hearings. And where's the engagement of the public? Now I've heard response to my concerns in this is that The public can also speak to you by way of emails in that form. Well, that's blinding to the public from hearing respectfully what other members of the public are speaking to you. It needs to be on the record, and they need to speak to you and not at a distance. And respectfully, got 24 seconds left. You need to stop this kind of, just the last thing is, a lot of those items appear to be more of a situation of accommodations and stuff like that, to certain groups or whatever. That's exhausting, and it's more appearance that it's more of a plug to get more votes, with all due respect, for you in your way of running for office. Thank you very much, and my time is up, respectfully.
Thank you. All right, we don't have anyone else in person. Do we have anyone on the phone?
We have 2 people who are called in. And if you want, I'll go.
Yeah.
So caller ending in 0522, 0522, you are unmuted and you have your time to speak.
Hi, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. This is Louis Imbriani. There are a couple things that were brought up, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what's going on in those work sessions about the EOs to AOs. The main issue that I see coming from the COVID topic and the EOs to AOs is that we're in a state of emergency, as stated by the mayor, acting mayor, and as stated by the assembly. Where is the incident commander? Where are the people that are trained in how to assuage the fears of the public and promote a general goal of trying to accomplish the same task? Why are, for lack of a better word, politicians, because you are the legislative body, trying to legislate our response to a pathological, biological thing that is causing this state of emergency? So while I don't think the intended purpose is to come off looking this way, I can't help but ask, if we're in an emergency, where are the people who are trained to deal with the emergency situations? I mean, we have an Office of Emergency Management. I haven't heard an update from them in, I don't know, since April, May time. We're in January. So all of these things, the mayor talking, the health department giving updates, these people should be included in the conversation, but they don't have the specialty, they don't have the skill at really responding to emergencies. And it falls on your guys' shoulders, and I feel that is extremely unfair. And I know that you guys are all trying to do your part, but this EO to AO thing is just absolutely crazy. You're saying that it gives the public the opportunity, time to speak. How many times have we come down to the chambers of the assembly? How many emails have been sent in regards to these emergency orders saying that we don't want them, we don't need them, let us live our lives because there's a 99% chance of survival? I mean, what more do you want? It's been on record. We've gone on record. There are hundreds of people that have sent in emails regarding it. I can see it on the municipal website. I mean, it's over, and it should be over and done with. I mean, look at our numbers. Look at what the test does. The test doesn't even tell you if somebody's contagious. And the test it's a good test. It can tell you if it's there or not, but it doesn't tell you anything more than that. And that doesn't do anything to actually help protect people. I mean, I don't know what else. I feel like I'm going crazy here trying to talk sense to a bunch of people that don't even want to look at the actual medical text that's coming out about the test, about the virus, about the vaccine. I'm not saying don't get tested, don't get the vaccine, but do the research. Look at it.
Sir. Your time is up. Thanks so much. Who do we have next?
We have another caller ending in 7763. You are unmuted, 7763.
Hi, it's just Mackenzie Pope. I don't have any public comment.
Okay, thanks. All right, Do we have anything in the Q&A?
Nothing in the Q&A.
Okay. Then we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and I will see everyone again at 12:45. Thanks. I think this meeting went well. I think we dealt with a lot of the technical issues. I think the sound check worked. So I'll likely be reaching out to committee chairs to see if you want to use this system. I will say I think it's a staff-intensive and time-intensive system, so we probably don't want to do all of the committees. But if there's maybe one or two committees that want to maybe play around with this concept, happy to entertain that. With that, this meeting is adjourned.